1883, the red clay of Georgia still bled from the wounds of war. For 18 brutal years, one man, Elias Drew, had not spoken a single word. Not a whisper. Not a prayer aloud. His silence was no curse from men, it was a covenant with God Himself. But when the trial began in that crumbling courthouse, the man who chose eternal quiet would open his mouth, and the guilty would finally hear heaven's verdict. The man who never spoke for 18 years. What he said at the trial will haunt Georgia forever. The red clay of Harrow County, Georgia, baked under the late summer sun of 1883 like bread left too long in hell's own oven. Humidity pressed down, thick as unspoken sin, soaking through cotton shirts and turning every breath into a labored prayer. Cicadas screamed in the pine thickets. Distant field hands sang low spirituals, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water, but one man moved through the haze without a sound. Elias Drew. 45 years old. Shoulders broad from a lifetime of breaking the same stubborn earth that once owned him. Skin the deep umber of turned soil after rain. Eyes like polished river stones, watching, always watching, revealing nothing. For 18 years, since the cannons of Appomattox had fallen silent and the promise of freedom turned to chains of paper and debt, Elias had not uttered one syllable. Not to beg. Not to curse. Not even to praise the Lord who had delivered His people from Egypt only to lead them into another wilderness. His silence was legend. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts when He passed. Old women crossed themselves. White men like the foreman muttered that a man who don't speak is a man who's plotting. But Elias simply walked on, boots barely whispering against the dust, as if the very air itself feared to disturb him. Dawn had not yet broken when Elias rose in his one-room cabin on the edge of the Voss property. The structure was little more than rough pine logs chinked with mud, a dirt floor swept clean every evening with a broom made of tied palmetto. No pictures on the walls. No mirror. Only a small wooden cross he had carved himself hanging above the narrow pallet. He knelt first every morning, the same ritual. No words left his lips, but inside his mind the scriptures rolled like thunder. I said, I will take heed to my ways, that I sin not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle, Psalm 39. His vow. His armor. He washed his face in a tin basin of rainwater, the cool shock reminding him he was still flesh. Breakfast was cold corn pone left from yesterday, a sliver of fatback, and black coffee so strong it could wake the dead. He ate standing, gazing through the open door at the fields stretching to the horizon, endless rows of cotton bolls glowing like small white souls in the first light. Sharecroppers, both black and white, already stirred in their own cabins farther down the road. Most were trapped in the same cruel arithmetic Elias had watched devour families for years. The Voss family furnished the seed, the mule, the plow. At harvest they took half the crop, sometimes more once debts were settled. The ledger always favored the house. Freedom, it turned out, had a price written in invisible ink. Elias stepped outside. The air smelled of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint rot of last season's unpicked bolls. His worn brogans, patched so many times the leather looked like scripture itself, left faint prints in the dew. He walked the familiar path toward the big house and the stables, past the decaying columns of the Voss mansion where paint peeled like old skin. The war had taken the Voss fortune the way locusts take a crop, leaving pride and debt in equal measure. Children playing near the road froze when they saw him. A small boy, maybe 8, with wide eyes and bare feet, tugged his sister's sleeve. "That's the man who ain't spoke since the Yankees come," the girl whispered. "Mama says the devil stole his tongue." Elias met their gaze. He offered the faintest nod, nothing more. The boy's fear melted into shy curiosity. Elias reached into his pocket, pulled out a smooth river stone he had polished the night before, and placed it gently in the boy's palm. Then he continued on. No smile. No word. But the stone said everything. "I see you. You are not forgotten." At the stables, the horses nickered softly as he entered. He moved among them with the quiet authority of a man who understood that animals, like God, required no explanations. He curried the big bay mare, his strong hands working the brush in steady rhythm. Sweat soon beaded on his forehead, tracing clean lines down the dust on his face. Jedediah Finch, the foreman, watched from the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Still ain't got nothing to say, Drew?" Jedediah spat tobacco juice into the dirt. 18 years. Must be a lot rotten inside that head of yours." Elias never looked up. He simply finished the mare, hung the brush, and moved to repair a broken harness. His silence was a wall higher than any the Confederacy had built. Jedediah feared it the way small men fear anything they cannot bully or buy. Because silence could not be whipped. Silence could not be cheated at the ledger. Silence simply witnessed. By mid-morning Elias was in the cotton field, mending fence rails split by last winter's ice. The sun climbed higher, merciless. His shirt clung to his back like a second skin. The red clay sucked at his boots with every step, clay that had drunk the blood of both enslaved and free. He worked with precision born of decades, measuring with his eye, driving nails with 3 clean strikes. Other laborers, black sharecroppers mostly, called greetings. He answered only with a raised hand or a nod. They respected him. Some pitied him. None truly understood. Only Ruth, the elderly woman who had once been house servant to the Voss family, came close. She found him at noon under the shade of a massive live oak, eating the simple lunch she had left wrapped in cloth, greens, cornbread, a sliver of smoked ham. Ruth's face was a map of wrinkles, her eyes milky but sharp. "You still carry in it all inside, child?" she asked softly, sitting on a stump. "I remember when you sang. Voice like spring water over stones. Talked about the stars like they was your cousins." Elias looked at her. His eyes softened, the only crack in the fortress. He reached out and touched her weathered hand. "That single gesture said more than 1,000 sermons, I remember too. The singing is still in here. The stars still speak." Ruth sighed. "The world done changed, Elias. But some things, they stay broke." He nodded once. Then returned to his fence. Clara Hayes, the young mixed-race cook at the main house, understood him differently. She was perhaps 28, with skin like warm caramel and eyes that carried their own quiet storms. When Elias delivered firewood to the kitchen door that afternoon, she met him with a tin cup of cool water and a smile that felt like absolution. "Thank you, Elias," she said, voice gentle as falling rain. She never rushed him. Never pitted. She simply spoke to the man she knew was there behind the silence. "The missus want the silver polished by supper. But you take your time. World already too loud." He accepted the cup, drank, handed it back. Their fingers brushed. For a heartbeat the air between them felt charged like the moment before lightning. Elias saw the worry in her eyes, the way her shoulders carried burdens she never named. He wanted to speak then. To tell her she was not alone. But the vow held. Instead he placed a small sprig of wild lavender he had picked earlier on the windowsill. "Beauty still grows here. Hold on." Inside the Voss mansion, the air was cooler but heavier with decay. Paint cracked on the wainscoting. Crystal chandeliers hung dim and dusty. Harlan Voss, tall, silver-haired, a man whose Confederate uniform still hung in his wardrobe like a ghost, watched Elias carry a heavy oak table across the parlor for polishing. Voss said little to him. Never had. There was a strange, grudging respect in the way he allowed Elias freedom most laborers never knew. Perhaps because Voss sensed the same steel in Elias that had once driven his own father to build an empire on other men's backs. Or perhaps because deep down Voss feared what would happen if that silence ever broke. "Reliable as the day is long," Voss would mutter to guests. "Don't complain. Don't steal. Don't talk back." What he never said aloud was the truth that haunted his nights, that man sees everything. To understand the depth of Elias Drew's silence, you had to travel back to the boy he once was. Before the war. Before the fire. Sarah Drew had been a house servant on the Voss plantation, quiet, fierce, her hands skilled at healing herbs and her mind sharper than any overseer's whip. She had carried the forbidden fire of knowledge inside her like contraband. At night, after the big house slept, she would pull young Elias close to the dying hearth. Using a charred stick on a smooth board, she taught him letters. This one sound like the wind in the pines, She risked everything. Literacy was a crime punishable by the lash. But Sarah believed the Lord had given her son a mind for a reason. Elias drank it in like a man dying of thirst. By age 10 he could read scraps of newspaper smuggled from the big house. By 12 he wrote poetry in stolen ledger pages, lines about the flight of hawks, the sorrow in his mother's eyes, the dream of a land where a black boy could speak his name without fear. He bound his notebooks with twine and hid them beneath the cabin floor. They were his secret Bible. His rebellion. His soul on paper. Then came the spring of 1865. The Union soldiers had come and gone like a storm that promised rain but left drought. The old order was cracking, and men like Overseer Pruitt, drunk on whiskey and dying pride, lashed out hardest at those who dared hope. Elias, then 27, had slipped into the far field during a brief rest. He sat beneath a dogwood tree, sketching a blue jay in one of his precious notebooks, the pencil moving with the grace of prayer. Pruitt rode up on his mule, face flushed crimson. "What you got there, boy?" Before Elias could hide it, Pruitt snatched the book. His eyes widened at the elegant script, the delicate drawing. Rage twisted his features. He rode straight to the cabin, kicked in the door, and tore up the floorboards. Every notebook, years of dreams, prayers, observations, poems, came into the light. Pruitt piled them high in the yard like kindling for judgment. He poured kerosene. Struck a match. The flames roared up, greedy and bright. Pages curled, blackened, words turning to ash. Freedom is the breath of God, Mother. One day we will sing together in the promised land. Lord, remember the voiceless. Elias stood frozen. The heat seared his face. Tears streamed, but no sound escaped. Inside, something eternal shifted. They can burn my words, he thought, the voice in his head clear as crystal. But they will never burn my soul again. From this day, I give them nothing. No sound. No weapon. I will be silent until the Lord himself commands me to speak. My silence will be my testimony. My witness. My judgment. It was no mere decision. It was a covenant. Like Zechariah struck mute until the appointed time. Like the suffering servant who opened not his mouth. Elias Drew chose to become a living psalm of defiance. The cost was crushing. Simple requests became pantomime. Misunderstandings cut deep. Pity from some, suspicion from most. Nights when grief clawed so hard he wanted to scream, he traced letters in the dirt instead, then smoothed them away before dawn. But the gifts were profound. Without speech, his eyes became knives. He noticed everything, the tremor in a white man's hand when he lied about weights at the gin, the way Clara's fingers tightened when she spoke of her missing brother, the exact moment the cotton bowls opened like small white prayers. He became the land's memory. The silent archive of every sin committed in the name of cotton and pride. 18 years later, that archive was full. And somewhere in Harrow County, a trial was being prepared. A white man accused of a crime so dark the whole county whispered. Evidence was thin. Testimony would decide everything. And one man, who had not spoken since the war, held the truth in his unbroken silence. A truth that, when released, would burn hotter than any bonfire Pruitt had ever lit. Because some silences are not empty. They are the hush before the voice of God thunders. And in the autumn of 1883, that thunder was coming to Harrow County. The Voss mansion stood like a tired old king on his crumbling throne, grand columns flaking white paint, windows shuttered against the heat, yet still leaking the scent of old money and older sins. Harlan Voss moved through its shadowed halls with the slow gait of a man who had once commanded armies of cotton and now commanded only memories. He was not cruel by nature, only careless, distracted by ledgers he no longer fully understood, by a wife whose mind cut sharper than his own, by the slow bleed of a fortune he could no longer staunch. To Harlan, Elias Drew was a fixture, reliable as the sunrise. A man who fixed what was broken without complaint, who asked nothing, who spoke nothing. Harlan never pressed him. Never mocked the silence. In some dim corner of his soul, Harlan recognized dignity when he saw it, even if he could not name it. He simply nodded when Elias passed, the way one nods to a faithful dog or a well-oiled gate. Eleanor Voss was different. She watched from the upper gallery, her dark eyes tracking Elias the way a hawk tracks movement in tall grass. Tall, angular, hair still black as raven wings despite her 48 years, Eleanor possessed the kind of intelligence that saw through people the way sunlight sees through stained glass, colorful, fractured, revealing. She had noticed, over the years, how Elias's gaze lingered not on surfaces but on the spaces between, the hesitation before a lie, the flicker of guilt in a lowered eye, the tremor in a hand that reached too quickly for coin. She knew his silence was no vacancy. It was a vault. And vaults, she understood, eventually demand to be opened. Beneath the surface of the Voss property, a poison had been spreading for years, slow, deliberate, almost elegant in its greed. Jedediah Finch, the foreman, was its architect. Broad-shouldered, red-faced, perpetually smelling of tobacco and resentment, Jedediah had spent a decade standing in Harlan Voss's shadow and hating every inch of it. He told himself. He was the better man, stronger back, sharper eye for profit, more ruthless when the moment called for it. The truth was simpler, he was smaller in every way that mattered, and he knew it. So he stole. Not in grand heists, but in 1,000 small cuts. Inflated bills for seed and fertilizer that never arrived in full. Crop sales recorded at half their worth, the difference slipping into his pocket. Phantom workers on the payroll, ghost names drawing wages that funded new boots, a silver watch, a better saddle. He kept his secret ledger in a hollowed-out Bible in his cabin, the irony lost on no one who might ever find it. Elias had seen it all. From the stable rafters while currying horses, from the edge of the field while driving fence posts, from the hallway while carrying firewood past the study door left ajar. He had watched Jedediah's late-night visits to the big desk, candle guttering as the foreman's thick fingers moved numbers like chess pieces. He had noted the new brass lantern on Jedediah's porch, the sudden fatness of his horse, the way the man's eyes darted when suppliers came to call. Every detail filed away, silent as dust settling. Clara Hayes was the next thread in the unraveling. Young, quiet, skin the warm gold of late afternoon light, Clara moved through the kitchen with the grace of someone who had learned early that survival meant being useful and invisible at once. She ordered flour, sugar, coffee, tallied what came in against what was used. At first the discrepancies were small enough to dismiss a missing sack here, an overcharge there. But patterns emerged like bruises under skin. She brought the first one to Eleanor on a Tuesday morning, voice low, invoice trembling slightly in her hand. "Ma'am, this bill for 20 pounds of sugar. We only used 12 last month." Eleanor studied the paper. Her lips thinned. "And the flour?" "Same. Short." They spoke in fragments, never naming the thief aloud. But the name hung between them like smoke. Elias, polishing silver at the long kitchen table, heard every word. Saw the fear bloom in Clara's eyes when she glanced toward the doorway. Saw the steel enter Eleanor's spine. He sketched it later that night by lamplight, Clara's hand on the invoice, fingers tight, Eleanor's profile sharp against the window, the faint outline of Jedediah's shadow passing the hall beyond. Symbols only he could read, crossed lines for lies, a broken circle for betrayal, a single dot for the truth still waiting. His journal had become a silent courtroom. No words, only maps of guilt. As October deepened, the air on the Voss place thickened with dread. Cotton bolls hung heavy and white, ready for picking, but the real harvest was fear. Jedediah snapped at field hands over nothing. His eyes flicked to every face, searching for accusation. Clara withdrew deeper into the kitchen, movements mechanical, smiles forced. Eleanor paced the verandas at dusk, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed bone white. Harlan retreated further into his study, oblivious or willfully blind. Elias felt the storm gathering the way animals feel it, hairs rising on his arms, a tightness in his chest. He kept moving through his tasks, mending harness, hauling water, repairing shutters. But inside, the archive grew heavier. Every glance, every hushed word, every lie added weight. His silence, once armor, now felt like a tomb. October 17, 1883. Dusk came soft, the sky bruised purple and gold. The air smelled of cut hay, wood smoke, and the faint metallic promise of rain. Elias finished the last fence repair near the far pasture as the sun bled out behind the pines. He walked home slow, boots scuffing red clay. Inside his cabin he ate beans and cornbread standing, then carried his journal to the porch. He sat. Watched stars prick the sky one by one. Listened to the night owl call, wind in the live oaks, distant. Dog. But tonight the peace was false. Earlier he had seen Jedediah arguing with a field hand, face purple, fist clenched. Seen Clara hurrying from the big house, shoulders hunched like she carried stones. Seen Eleanor on the veranda, staring into nothing, hands twisting a handkerchief. Now a single lamp burned in Harlan's study, a steady yellow eye in the dark. Elias watched it. Voices drifted out. Muffled at first. Then sharper. Jedediah's baritone, angry, rising. Clara's softer reply, pleading, frightened. A crash, glass or wood. A stifled cry. Elias stood. Moved soundless through the tree line, shadow among shadows. Closer now. Through the study window, Jedediah's bulk looming. Clara smaller, backing away. Gestures violent. Then the light shifted, someone falling. Silence. Terrible silence. The back door opened. Jedediah emerged, coat askew, breathing hard. He strode to the stable. Elias followed at a distance, heart hammering but steps ghost quiet. Inside the stable, harness jingled. Bess, the dappled gray mare, Harlan's pride, nickered uneasily. Jedediah saddled her clumsily, hands shaking. Mounted in a scramble. Spurred her hard. Hooves thundered down the road toward town, swallowed by night. Elias waited. Listened. No more cries. No lantern relit. Only cicadas and his own slow breath. Dawn came cruel. Thomas, the stable boy 14, all elbows and nerves, found her. Kitchen door ajar. Clara Hayes on the flagstone floor, eyes open, staring at nothing. Blood pooled dark beneath her head. A heavy iron skillet lay inches from her hand, as if she had tried to defend herself. Thomas screamed a high, animal sound that split the morning. People ran. Harlan stumbled in, face gray. Eleanor behind him, hand over her mouth. Laborers gathered, whispers spreading like kerosene on dry grass. Jedediah appeared last, clothes wrinkled, eyes red, but voice steady. Josiah Miller, he said, loud enough for all to hear. He was here last night. I heard them arguing yesterday. Man's got a temper. Always did. Deputy Thorne arrived within the hour, uniform too big, courage too small. He looked at the body, at the crowd, at Jedediah's earnest face, and chose the easy path. Josiah Miller, he repeated, already convinced. Elias stood at the crowd's edge. Motionless. His eyes met Thorne's for one heartbeat. In that moment, Elias knew. The truth had a witness. And the witness had stayed silent for 18 years. But silence, like any vow, has its breaking point. And the breaking was coming. Soon. The arrest of Josiah Miller ripped through Harrow County like a blade through wet cotton, quick, clean, and meant to bleed out any hope of truth. Dawn had barely broken when Deputy Thorne and his makeshift posse, two sunburned farmers with shotguns slung low, kicked open the door of Josiah's modest cabin on the edge of the black settlement. Josiah stood at the rough pine table, Bible open, pencil in hand, outlining his Sunday sermon on the parable of the unjust steward. A man of 40, broad through the shoulders from years of honest labor, voice deep and measured like a slow river. His sermons had steadied souls through Reconstruction's betrayals, through lynchings whispered about in the night, through the slow strangulation of sharecropping. He looked up, calm even then. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "what brings you to my door before the Lord's light is full?" Thorne didn't answer with words. He nodded once. The farmers stepped forward, rough hands seizing Josiah's wrists, twisting them behind his back. Rope bit into skin. Josiah didn't resist, didn't shout. Only asked, voice steady. "By what charge do you bind a man?" "Murder," Thorne muttered. Clara Hayes. You were seen near the Voss place. You argued with her. Josiah's eyes never left Thorne's face. I swear before Almighty God, I never raised a hand to that woman. I barely knew her troubles. The deputies dragged him outside. His wife, Ruth N., appeared in the doorway, apron still dusted with flour, children clinging to her skirts. She didn't scream. She wept the silent, bone-deep weeping of women who had seen this play before. The children stared, wide-eyed, as their father was marched down the red clay road toward town. White folks lined the porches. Some nodded approval. Others looked away, uneasy but unwilling to speak against the current. In the black quarters, doors cracked open just enough for eyes to witness. Faces hardened with the old, familiar grief. Another son taken. Another truth buried before. It could breathe. Samuel Davies watched from the doorway of his dry goods store. A small, nervous man with thinning hair and a perpetual sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He had seen Jedediah that night, October 17, riding Bess hard down the moonlit road, coat flapping, face twisted in panic. Their eyes had met for one frozen second. Samuel had frozen too. Now, days later, the image haunted him like a fever dream. But fear held his tongue tighter than any rope. Jedediah was Voss's right hand. Voss owned half the county's credit. One word from Jedediah could ruin Samuel's store, his home, his family's fragile place in this world. So Samuel said nothing. He stocked shelves, smiled at customers, and let conscience gnaw like rats in the walls. Eleanor Voss watched the spectacle from the mansion's upper window. Her hands gripped the sill until the knuckles blanched. She had tried to speak to Harlan the night before quietly, urgently, in the dim parlor. Jedediah accused too quickly. Too certainly. Clara came to me with the books. The thefts. And now this? Harlan had stared into the fire. Woman's nerves, he muttered. Thorne has his man. Let the law work. But his voice lacked conviction. His silence was not Elias's holy vow, it was the coward's hush, the refusal to look at rot growing in one's own house. Deputy Thorne's investigation was theater. He questioned field hands under Jedediah's shadow. Answers came clipped, eyes down. Josiah had a temper. Heard him complain about Clara. Lies stitched together with fear. No weapon found. No blood on Josiah's clothes. No footprints matched. Thorne didn't search the stable. Didn't question Jedediah's midnight ride. Didn't care. The white community wanted order restored. A black man convicted would do nicely. Jedediah strutted the property now, chest puffed, smirk sharp as a new razor. He had one. The ledger was safe. The murder pinned elsewhere. He slept better than he had in months. Elias Drew watched it all without blinking. He began visiting Josiah in the county jail, a dank stone box smelling of mildew, sweat, and despair. Elias sat on the visitor's bench, back straight, eyes locked on the preacher through the bars. No words passed. None needed. Josiah, hollowed by shock, found strange peace in that gaze. It said, I see you. I believe you. You are not alone. On the third visit, Elias slid a folded scrap of paper between the bars. Josiah's fingers trembled as he opened it. No writing. Only a precise pencil sketch, the Voss property layout, fences, stable, main house, and one small X marked near the stable's rear wall, beneath the hayloft. Josiah looked up. Elias nodded once, slow, deliberate. Hope, fragile as a new flame, kindled in the preacher's chest. The trial came fast, the way injustice hurries when it smells blood. Harrow County Courthouse, late October 1883. A squat brick building with tall narrow windows like suspicious eyes. Inside, the air hung heavy body odor, cheap tobacco, the sour tang of fear sweat. Every pew packed. White faces filled the front and middle, black faces crowded the rear gallery, standing when seats ran out. Judge Amos Crane sat high on the bench, jowls heavy, eyes weary from decades of seeing the same play. He believed in law the way a man believes in a leaky boat, necessary, but not trustworthy. His gavel cracked like dry lightning. Court is in session. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious DA with slicked hair and a voice like polished brass, built his case on sand. Character witnesses smeared Josiah, hot-tempered, resentful, always arguing religion too loud. Hearsay piled on hearsay. Jedediah took the stand, smooth as oil on water. I saw him near the house that night, he lied, eyes steady. He and Clara had words the day before. Jealousy, pure and simple. No one challenged him. Josiah's lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, 26, fresh from reading law books by lamplight, was drowning. His objections were weak reeds snapped by Judge Crane's rulings. His cross-examinations faltered. His closing argument trembled. Josiah sat at the defense table, hands folded, face carved from dark oak. Dignity intact. Eyes carrying the weight of a man already half-buried. He glanced once, twice, toward the back row. Elias sat there, last pew, last man. Motionless for 3 days. A statue of waiting. Samuel Davies took the stand on the second afternoon. Pale. Shaking. Bible under sweating palm. Did you see anyone on the road that night? The prosecutor asked. Samuel's eyes flicked to Jedediah. Jedediah smiled, small, cold, lethal. No, sir, Samuel whispered. Road was empty. A low groan rose from the black gallery. Eleanor Voss, front row, gripped her husband's arm. Harlan stared straight ahead, jaw locked. 3 days. The prosecution rested. Abernathy's closing fell flat. Judge Crane began jury instructions, voice droning like summer insects. Then, movement. In the back row, Elias Drew rose. Slow. Deliberate. Tall frame unfolding like a judgment. Every head turned. Whispers died. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Crane paused mid-sentence. Mr. Drew? Elias stood silent. Eyes burning not with anger, but with something older, deeper. The light of a man who had carried truth in darkness for 18 years. Jedediah's smirk vanished. Face drained gray. Harlan leaned forward, mouth open. Eleanor closed her eyes, tears sliding free. The silence stretched thicker, heavier than any gavel's echo. 18 years of it, coiled tight, ready to spring. Elias drew breath. A low rasp, stone on stone, scraped from his throat. A cough. A clearing. The sound alone cracked the room like glass. Men flinched. Women gasped. Then voice. Hoarse at first. And used. Gravel dragged over iron. But growing. Clear. Unbreakable. I waited, Elias said. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shock spread outward. I waited, he repeated, stronger now, until someone was finally willing to listen. A collective gasp tore through the courtroom. Judge Crane's gavel hung forgotten in midair. Jedediah half rose, gripping the table, eyes wild with animal fear. Harlan Voss stared as if seeing a ghost made flesh. Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth. Elias Drew, the man who had sealed his lips against whips, against fire, against a world that burned his words, spoke again. And every soul in that suffocating room understood. The reckoning had begun. The courtroom hung in frozen shock, the echo of Elias Drew's first words still ringing like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Judge Crane recovered first. His gavel hovered, then fell once, sharp, uncertain. Mr. Drew, he said, voice thinner than before, if you have testimony to offer, you must approach the stand and be sworn. Elias moved. Slow. Unhurried. Each step deliberate, boots soft on the worn pine floor. Every eye tracked him. Breath held. Hearts hammered against ribs. The bailiff extended the Bible. Elias placed his calloused hand upon it. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. The voice, rough as river gravel and used for nearly 2 decades, carried nonetheless. Firm. Clear. Final. My name is Elias Drew. I have lived on the Voss property for 45 years. I have seen much. I have heard much. And I have remembered everything. He turned. Looked straight at Jedediah Finch. Jedediah flinched as if struck. Color drained from his face, leaving it the gray of wet ash. Jedediah Finch, Elias said, each syllable measured, resonant, has systematically embezzled from Harlan Voss for the past 7 years. The courtroom exploded. Shouts. Gasps. Chairs scraping. A woman cried out. Jedediah surged to his feet. Lies, he roared. He's a mute. He's mad. He can't. Silence, Mr. Finch. Judge Crane's gavel slammed again and again. Another outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Sit down. Jedediah collapsed back into his chair, trembling. Elias continued, undisturbed. His voice grew steadier with every sentence, gaining the quiet authority of a man who had rehearsed truth in silence for 18 years. He began small. Inflating invoices for feed and seed. On April 12, 1876, he charged for 20 sacks of cornmeal. Only 15 arrived. The ledger will show the discrepancy on page 47, third entry from the bottom. He recited dates. Amounts. Names of suppliers. Exact falsified figures. The payroll ghosts, names invented, wages pocketed. The hidden second ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, buried beneath a loose floorboard under Jedediah's bed. The prosecutor, once smug, now scribbled frantically, eyes wide. The gallery leaned forward as one. Elias's gaze never wavered from Jedediah. Clara Hayes discovered it, he said, voice softening like twilight. She brought the discrepancies to Mrs. Voss. Quietly. Carefully. I saw their conversations by the pantry door in the kitchen. I saw Mrs. Voss's face change when the pattern became clear. He nodded toward Eleanor. She sat rigid, tears shining, yet chin high. Elias described hushed arguments he had overheard through open windows. Clara's soft defiance. Jedediah's growing menace. The fear in Clara's eyes the last weeks. The desperation in Jedediah's gestures. Then, the night. The room went death still. On the night of October 17, Elias said, I was on my porch. A lamp burned in Mr. Voss's study. Voices rose. Jedediah Finch and Clara Hayes. Their shadows moved behind the curtain. He was agitated. She was pleading. He paused. Let the memory settle. A sharp sound. Something breaking. A stifled cry. Jedediah emerged from the back door. He moved fast. To the stable. He saddled Bess' dappled gray, white blaze, 3 white socks. Mounted her clumsily. Rode hard toward town. It was 12 minutes past midnight. I marked the time by the stars. His eyes found Samuel Davies in the gallery. Samuel shrank. Samuel Davies was returning from Waycross that night. His wagon crossed paths with Jedediah on the road. They saw each other. They looked into each other's eyes. Samuel broke. A choked sob tore from him. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. The courtroom erupted again. Jedediah rose halfway, then crumpled. Face green. Hands clutching his chest. Eyes rolling back. He fell to the floor like a felled tree. Bailiffs rushed forward. Someone shouted for water. Judge Crane pounded for order, voice cracking. Elias reached into his coat. Drew out the worn leather journal. Its cover was scarred, pages yellowed, edges frayed from years of silent handling. He passed it to the bailiff. The bailiff carried it to the bench with trembling hands. Judge Crane opened it. No words. Only drawings. Maps. Symbols. Precise, elegant sketches. Jedediah hunched over ledgers by candlelight, the X beneath the floorboard, Bess saddled in moonlight, shadows in the study window, dates and times rendered as constellations of tiny marks. A visual chronicle. A silent indictment. The judge read aloud, translating symbols into narrative. Theft after theft. Lie after lie. The night of murder captured in stark lines. The courtroom listened in stunned hush. 18 years of observation pressed down like the hand of God. Jedediah, revived but broken, was dragged to his feet in irons. Confronted with the journal, with Elias's unyielding testimony, with Samuel's tearful corroboration, he shattered. A rambling confession poured out. Embezzlement for years. Clara's discovery. Her threat to tell Harlan. His rage. The blow with the iron skillet. The flight on Bess. Tying her in a grove outside town. Returning before dawn to play the shocked foreman. Everything Elias had said. Confirmed. Josiah Miller was released that evening. The cell door swung open. Josiah stepped into twilight air. His wife ran to him. Children clung. Tears. Laughter. Hymns rising spontaneous from the crowd gathered outside the courthouse, black voices lifting amazing grace into the cooling sky. Josiah sought Elias in the throng. Grasped his hand. No words. Only eyes meeting eyes. Gratitude deeper than speech. Elias nodded once. The reckoning spread. Deputy Thorne was quietly dismissed. His badge tarnished beyond salvage. Samuel Davies, conscience finally freed, stood taller. Eleanor Voss found Elias the next morning. He sat on his porch, journal closed beside him. She sat without invitation. Elias, she whispered, you saved a man. You brought light where there was none. How do I thank you? He looked at her. Then took paper. Pencil. Wrote one line in his still elegant hand. They would not have believed me then. They were not ready to listen. She read it. Tears fell freely. She understood. His silence had been strategy. Patience. A refusal to cast pearls before swine. He had waited until the truth could not be ignored, until evidence, not just words, demanded justice. You are a remarkable man, she said. Harlan came later. Alone. Humbled. He stood before the cabin, hat in hand. Elias, all these years. You knew. Why didn't you tell me? Elias wrote again. You did not ask the right questions, Mr. Voss. And you were not ready for the answers. Harlan read. Shoulders sagged. He saw himself reflected, blind, complacent, complicit in his own ruin. The Voss estate fractured. Parcels sold. The big house left to weather and vines. Harlan and Eleanor moved to a modest home in town. Pride broken. Eyes opened. Elias remained. Same cabin. Same routines. But lighter. The community, black and white, now looked at him with quiet awe. Children no longer hid. Men nodded respect. Women whispered prayers of thanks. Months later. Late autumn. Elias sat on his porch at dusk. New journal open on his knee. Pages blank. Pencil poised. The air smelled of wood smoke and turned earth. Cicadas sang. Stars emerged one by one. He looked at the empty page. Then at the wide, silent land of Harrow County, a land that had carried so much pain, so much hidden truth. He did not write. Not yet. The choice was his. His silence had preserved his soul. Protected the innocent. Delivered justice when the moment ripened. He had spoken when heaven required it. Now, the quiet was his again. Earned. Sacred. A man who had refused the world his voice for 18 years had reclaimed it, and in reclaiming it, had shown that true power often lies not in what is said, but in what is held back until the appointed time. And in that hush, under the vast Georgia sky, Elias Drew found peace.